Ben Shapiro is a conservative talking head that white nationalists love to tout as a racism debunking, political correct, deflating, pro-American patriot that sticks it to people who would do white America harm by proclaiming that their Black Lives Matter. A Facebook acquaintance of mine recently posted this video of a Black Lives Matter takedown by Shapiro, in which he reinforces the types of bias that are and have been leading to much of the racial inequality that exists in the United States. That someone would allow a man to sit and spew infactual information and act as if they are cultural truths is really disgusting. That someone feels the need to take down someone who is only saying that their lives is as important as everyone else's is just as disgusting, maybe more so. Shapiro in this video makes one point clear. He feels as if the issues black people face are cultural. Keep this in mind as you listen to his argument, which is in a nutshell that black culture is one of failure and social deviance, and that it is this culture that keeps blacks poor and disenfranchised, and no outside forces exist that lead to economic disparities. Meaning he believes facts like lower callback rates for job applicants with black-sounding names to be inconsequential to income inequality, because bad decisions like dropping out of high school, apparently a black cultural standard, make them so. He argues rather weakly, but with confidence, that his data, which shows a correlation between two data sets, are the causes of issues, despite the possibility that the data could just as easily mean just the opposite and be the result of that issue instead. And so in lies the problem with using correlating data to make an argument for causation. I personally try to refrain from this sort of thing unless there's no room for argument. For example, my argument that bias leads to harsher treatment for minorities in the justice system leaves little room to refute, since any argument against this must make an account for such damning numbers by showing a bias other than racism or a justifiable difference in minority criminals that is also quantifiable. To simplify and to give an example, saying that culture leads to higher rates of high school dropouts causing income inequality does not account for the possibility that income inequality could at least be a contributing factor to dropout rate.
White family worth, in terms of financial worth, is 69 times more than that of black families. Given this disparity, how can you argue that racism is not a driving factor in income inequality?
Because it has nothing to do with race and everything to do with culture. And when you have a culture that doesn't, you know what? Explain to me. You explain to me why black kids aren't graduating high school. Explain that one to me.
There's never an example in science where a statistical minority is considered factual evidence to a characteristic of the whole. A scientist would never say American men are over 6 feet tall when less than 20% are. And yet he does just that here. Over 70% of blacks graduate high school. So this, and not the remaining 30%, is the most accurate description of black culture. Should we be working to make that minority even smaller? Absolutely. But let's not pretend that black people are dropping out of high school en masse, because that's an outright lie. Consider too that when adjusting for economic class, the high school dropout rates between blacks and whites are almost identical. Compelling evidence that economic status actually could have an impact on dropout rates.
Explain to me why black kids are shooting each other in rates significantly higher than whites are shooting each other. Explain to me why 13% of the population is responsible for 50% of the murder.
Again, remember, he's calling this rate of murder black culture, when even in Chicago, where murders are in an epidemic proportions this year, murderers are an overwhelming minority. Is murder here and across the country a problem? Yes, but it is a far cry from black culture when less than 0.4% of blacks in Chicago and 0.7% of blacks of the United States participate annually.
Explain to me why the number of black kids in prison, not for innocent reasons, not for walking down the street and getting pulled into a prison, is so high.
This is a statement with a complex answer. Are there higher crime rates in black communities? Yes. And of course, this is a result of bad decisions by those criminals. But when reviewing data such as the rate of marijuana use in the United States that is largely identical between whites and blacks, despite a rate of arrest of blacks for marijuana possession that is 4 times higher than that of whites, when you look at research that shows non-whites are less likely to receive a warning by police, that blacks are more likely to be subject to both legal and illegal searches by police, and that suspicious activity by whites is substantially less likely to be questioned by police, you have to wonder whether equal policing of whites would result in a more equal crime rate. But even if these things weren't a factor in the crime rate, numbers still show less than 10% of black Americans participating in criminal activity, meaning that the crime rate is not a part of black culture. And I'm not defending criminal activity here, but implying that black cultural embrace of crime exists in stark defiance to actual numbers should not go unchallenged. In addition to that, a major point of fact is that crime rates in black communities have fallen as much as 800% in some areas, while simultaneously downward economic mobility and unemployment have increased, which begs the argument, if economic inequality is directly tied to crime rates, then why are economic conditions not improving despite a falling rate of crime?
Explain, if it has nothing to do with culture, explain to me why the single motherhood rate in the black community jumped from 20% to 70% in the same course of time that the civil rights movement has made such tremendous strides. Is America more racist now than it was in 1960? And if it is, please explain to me how that happened.
While the number of single-parent households in the black community has risen over the past few decades, and this could point to a problem and does commonly lead to hardships in upward mobility, there is more to this single statistic than what is being presented. Firstly, these rates are falling in the black community while they are rising in white community. Second, black children in single-parent homes see more dual-parent involvement than whites, and all other races for that matter. Black fathers living outside of the home are 3 times as likely to see their children daily than white fathers, and are also more likely to participate in activities, help with homework, and eat meals with their children daily. Additionally, the increases in cultural acceptability of single-parent homes is at the highest it's ever been, with many single parents choosing that role. Additionally, nearly 60% of unwed parents are cohabitating. Finally, single parents are more likely to be high school graduates and graduate college at roughly the same rate as dual parents, leading at least to the possibility that race or even their status as single parents being the cause of some economic hardships common to the single-parent community.
I'm offended by the language of uprising applied to people who are breaking into other black people's stores and looting them. This is a lack of values. And people who are destroying private property, destroying cop cars, in an uprising against what exactly?
Once again, crime and violence is not broadly accepted by the black community. Even if a riot has 30,000 participants from Baltimore's black community, that means that 90% of Baltimore's black community were not participating in riots, and therefore rioting is as much black culture as celebrating in this way
been arrested for fighting or creating disturbances
is white culture.
I'm just saying that you're going to have sexists, you're going to have racists, you're going to have all this stuff. I mean, I'm just saying that...
I agree it exists, but the problem that I'm seeing, and this is the problem with the general conversation, is that there's no solution in simply saying there's racism out there. How does that solve anything?
I absolutely agree, but I'm also quite shocked at the gall when someone such as Shapiro argues vehemently against the idea that racism can and does cause problems, and is then forced to admit to racism as a problem. His statements ring hollow, especially since I'd be willing to bet he's heard, as I have, that admitting to a problem is the first step in seeking a solution. Ben Shapiro is an academic with a dozen or so literary works in which he argues against racism as a cause for problems seen in America. He here says racism is real, admits to a lack of practical solutions being injected into the discussion, and instead of applying his own, returns to this now obviously veiled attempt at deflating the argument and empowering others with bullshit anecdotes they can hide behind in order to refrain from taking even that first step of admitting the problem. Thanks for tuning in, guys. I'm out.